Hey guys, welcome back. Mark with ExoticCar PlayPlace. Today I have a special video, and that really is to summarize what am I about? What do I like? How do I earn my living? A lot of you guys have been asking. The reason I'm bringing that up today is because this week I finally made 10,000 subscribers. That is a big deal for me. The first year or so of YouTube for me was a little bit slow going. I was just kind of kicking tires. The last 2 years, I finally figured out, some of the logistics and how I need to proceed. And now I finally made 10,000 subscribers thanks to you guys. And now the next big tag, of course, is 100,000 subs. So there's a history as to where this came from, why I am a car person, and I'm going to share that with you. So on a personal level, I'm going to cut to the chase. I'm not going to tell you a whole lot of story. At the end of the day, before I get into the cars that I've owned over the years, I'm going to express to you exactly what my personal background is. So firstly, you've got to know I come from basically a very humble background. My parents didn't have a lot of money. I did the best that I could as well, growing up and doing what I can. We had a sort of a slow start. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a silver spoon so to speak. Parents did what they could to feed us. We had a roof over our head, but we didn't have a lot else. And to be honest, we were never driving around in fancy cars. I wasn't that 18-year-old guy who drives his first Ferrari. It just wasn't me. I was too busy enjoying the social life with friends, kind of just enjoying being a young teenager and, of course, a young adult, in which case then I soon met my now wife, girlfriend. We dated. We then had about 4 kids. Of course, 4 kids in a period of, about 10 years or so span. In that time, we bought our first house. We owned that for a couple of years. We bought that with a little bit of money down. Of course, built some equity, moved on to the next house, sold that one, moved to the next house, which is currently where we live today. Now building equity in this one. Had the rest of our kids in this house, so we still own this house today. Building equity, which is a huge part of how you can build personal wealth, of course, is owning a house. So, and I've always been a believer of that. I've also owned another second home. So we ended up building a place out in the country. I like to be near the lake because we do a lot of boating in the summertime. So that kind of takes us to that. So that's another thing that I enjoy doing in the spare time, of course, is boating. I'm big into kind of wakeboarding. Wintertime, I love hockey. Never really made the hockey scene, of course. I think I missed the calling. I'm never going to be drafted to the NHL, but that's okay. I still enjoy doing it with a lot of the friends. Get together, have the local hockey games from time to time. So 4 kids, wife. We've got 2 houses right now. Like to spend time at the lake. That's the big thing. So my career, where did that start? Well, I went through high school, of course. I went through the regular gamut like most people do, grade 10, 11, 12, but I took the matriculation courses. I basically took the courses that were the most challenging, that would enable me to get into university as easy as possible. So then finished that, moved on to secondary or post-secondary education, then went into the electrical engineering tag. And I basically finished up with the electrical engineering field as such, and decided that I didn't want to push papers. I didn't want to sit at a desk all my life. So then I actually, of all things, I got into the trade. So I had a friend that kind of had a place that was able to get me into the trade. I got into the electrician's trade, apprenticed, got my ticket, and basically utilized that for a good 10 years or so before I got into the utilities. Then I got basically another ticket, or I started apprenticing for another type of trade, and that's power system certification. I really wanted to work in the high voltage substations, and after I got some of my hours and my certifications done on that, I was able to work in those high voltage substations, where you see the big transformers, those big power boxes, high voltage lines. I worked in there for a while, and then I transitioned into more high voltage work, but more on the service side of things. I got out of the public sector and more into the private business side of it. Did that, and then I felt that, I was ready for a change again. So then I got into an oil and gas outfit. That's where I'm at today. Now I've been here over, well, about 11 years now, and I started out as an electrician, servicing equipment here, more or less, like I said, where I live now. I did that for about 5 or 6 years, and it didn't take me long to realize, wait a minute, I had a knack, the personality, and I also care about people. That's always been sort of my nurturing inner self, is that I've always had a feeling that I would like to mentor and coach people. And even though, I wasn't necessarily in that position, I enjoyed being a mentor or a protege for a mentor. And, I thought I could take that step further. I ended up applying for a job within the company, wound up as a supervisor, and now I supervise a crew of about 22 people, high voltage, or basically tradespeople, electricians, millwrights, and I supervise a group of guys like this. It's very rewarding. I enjoy my work immensely, but that is where I am today, and that's how I afford this. Now, obviously, I've built this up over time. Some of the wealth has come from savings. I haven't never splurged a lot of money. My priorities have always been on cars and family. Well, family first, of course, cars second to that. So we bought the home, started working on the family, started buying the cars. Now, that essentially is where that comes from. And you'd ask the question, why do I even care about cars? Well, here's where the sort of the touching story about this all begins, before I even get into explaining to you the type of cars I actually have owned over the years. One day I was a very young teenager, and I was out with my dad, who, currently now is, unfortunately, he's very ill, but when I was quite a bit younger, we were out shopping for stereo equipment, and we were in a local stereo shop. I happened to notice a poster, and a lot of you guys are probably familiar with this poster, and it's a black poster, and it's got a red Lamborghini Countach on it with the telephone dial, more or less, type of wheels on the sides. There was a little tag on it as well, Alpine. It was an advertisement for Alpine stereos. I had seen this car on this poster, and I decided, I love that car. There's something so cool about it. I actually told my dad in the moment, I said, one day, Dad, I'm going to own a car like that. One day. And all he said, he had a little light chuckle, put his arm on my shoulder and said, you know what, son, I'm sure you can do it. Anything you put your mind to, I know you can accomplish it. And he just patted me on the back, and off we went. And from that day, when I was a young teenager, I promised him and myself that one day I would own an exotic car like that. So time goes on. As my first car, I basically want to kind of share with you or walk through with you guys the cars I've owned over the years. First car, everybody remembers their first car. Well, my first car was kind of a junky car. It was an old Mazda GLC hatchback. It was a little beater car, a little 4-speed manual gearbox. Didn't have a lot of power, a little 4-cylinder engine. Not a pretty car by any means. As a matter of fact, looks like the previous owner had splashed on with a brush, had actually hand painted some of the panels that were starting to deteriorate. The car was a mess, but we got it cheap, and that was my first car. I didn't have a Ferrari at 18. You know what? I had the little Mazda. It was a $800 car, and I enjoyed it for the next several years. That car had an interesting story, by the way. One time the battery died in it. So I went to the store, bought a new battery, put the old battery on the passenger seat while I drove home. Well, I hit the brakes once because I hit a red light and I had to make an emergency stop. The battery tipped over on the passenger seat. I didn't think anything of it. Next day, I put the battery in the garage. I go to pick up a friend of mine who we were going to play a round of golf. He jumps in there. About halfway to the golf course, he starts scratching his behind. So he's scratching, and an hour later we're looking, and his shorts have a big hole in the back. And he's like, what is this from? And all I could think, at the time it didn't dawn on me, and then as time went on, his shorts fell apart worse and worse and worse over the next hour or two. And then it finally dawned on me, you know what? I knocked over that battery, and you're sitting on battery acid. And from that day, we got the biggest chuckle and the biggest laugh out of that car. That car was one of the biggest memories for me, was with my friend and that little incident we had with the battery. So anyway, moving along, I decided to move off in that car, sell it. I got rid of it, bought a Fiat X19. It was a 1974, not a great car. It wasn't in particularly good shape. Wheel bearings were loose, the wheels were wobbling. It ran well, but the electrics were kind of flaky too. They kind of cut in and out. So I was a young guy, wanted a new sports car, so I anteed up and I spent like $1,500 on that car. Well, it needed a bunch of work, and so I spent some money on the front end, borrowed some money from my parents, got that thing running properly, and then I drove that for a few years. Now, the problem with that car was I actually had myself in several precarious situations because as a young guy with a new sporty car, I ended up driving it in a way that wasn't necessarily the most responsible. And looking back, I mean, I made some big mistakes in my younger years, but I caught myself in a couple of drifting type environments where I literally almost wrapped it around a telephone pole. And you know what, to this day, I still thank God that somebody was looking out for me and that I didn't actually crash it badly. So moving along, got rid of that car. It just became too much of a hassle because I ended up blowing a head gasket on it. I missed a shift, bent some valves. I also broke the clutch disc one time because of dropping clutches, revved it up and dropped a clutch, and I basically, through abuse, I killed that car. So anyway, I sold it to a wreckers. Then I decided to upgrade. I bought an RX-7, an 88. That for me was a low mileage. It was like a new to me car. It was in great shape. I kept it clean. My parents often commented, "You're going to wash the paint off of it," because I washed it so damn much. So anyway, I washed that car all the time. I drove it. I enjoyed it. It was a great car. Then around that time, I met the wife, and so I was transitioning. I was trying different things. I had friends of mine that had BMWs. I had two friends that had two different E30 BMWs. One was a 325e and the other one was a 325IS. I would go cruising with these guys, and it didn't take me long to realize that even though they only had these little inline 6-cylinder engines, that those cars felt actually sportier than my RX-7, which up to that point I thought was the best sports car around. Anyway, so I soon figured out there was always something a little special about BMW, but I didn't actually take action at that time. Then a little while later, one of these friends bought a 77 Porsche 911S Targa. Now, that's not the best Porsches that they've ever made. However, it was pretty damn cool. I really just kind of groveled over it. And when I saw this car for the first time, I fondled the fenders, I looked at it, I reveled in the tachometer and the engine sounds and the smoke that would come off, oil smoke on the manifold. That was pretty typical for air-cooled 911s back in the day. So I enjoyed every aspect of early 911 ownership from the passenger seat. We would go cruising and we would race Mustangs and motorcycles, and in most cases we would beat most of these cars. It got to the point where I was so impressed that I had to have my own. So then I went out on a search. I ended up buying a 69 911, which quickly changed hands because as soon as I bought it, one of my other friends wanted it. I quickly just transferred it over to him, and essentially I never really even owned the car for very long. Then I moved on to a 79 911 SC. I still wanted that 911, and so this time I found myself a little bit better car, 10 years newer. At the time, it was only 10 years old at that time, so it wasn't that old of a 911 at the time. I love that car. I took care of it. I cherished it. I drove the wheels off it, but I always looked after it. It was just an awesome machine. So a few years went on. I went to California with the wife on a vacation, and I stumbled across a Porsche 930. So that would be the turbo version of the 911 SC that I owned. I found one in a beautiful little town called, probably some of you guys have heard, Santa Barbara, California. Well, this guy actually owned this car. Turns out after the fact, after we went for a test drive, found out he did not actually have insurance on the car, which was obviously could have been a big problem. So anyway, we took this thing out for a drive. As we entered the on-ramp, he hits it. When he hits it, all there is just a ridiculous amount of turbo whine and sliding back and forth under hard acceleration. This car was just ridiculous. It just basically shocked me how fun this car can be and how much better a turbo was than a normally aspirated car. So as soon as I experienced that, I went back home and I put my car up for sale immediately because I had to have a turbo. So that process went on for a couple of years. Now, while I was waiting to try to sell the 911, I went through a few other cars. I ended up buying an earlier Volkswagen Cabrio Rabbit. It was kind of a junky car, same thing. But it was good. It was good on gas, and it was a cheap beater with the convertible. Bought that. I bought a Plymouth Horizon hatchback, piece of garbage that was. That I ended up losing a gearbox in that driving down the freeway. Then I ended up buying a Toyota Corolla. Also had some miles on it. That thing burned oil like nobody's business. Ridiculous piece of junk. Had to get rid of that. Then I ended up stumbling across a couple of other cars. A Saturn SC1. Do you remember those cars? Those plastic bodied beasts with the goofy little slide rail seat belts. Well, I had one of those, and I enjoyed it. It was actually a pretty cool car. Enjoyed it for a while, and then just decided to sell it, and found a young girl that basically decided she wanted that car. I almost gave it away to her because I ended up getting it cheap myself. But then I ended up buying another car. I got a Volkswagen Passat VR6 with the 5-speed manual. Black on black leather, sunroof, everything. I love that car. It was fast. I used to race Mustangs with that thing. That thing was really, really fun. The only downside was it had a lot of electrical gremlins. You notice the trend here. A lot of these cars had electrical problems. Of course, people try to unload it. I'm the next sucker in line to buy these pieces of junk. But I did like the way it drove. And so I truly believe that I've experienced a lot of different cars. It brings me to, to be the type of enthusiast that can truly criticize and enjoy, a lot of different cars. So I got rid of that Passat because it was a wreck. I mean, it looked great. It sounded good. It was fast. But it was just so many electrical gremlins, I couldn't deal with that anymore. So I got rid of that. I actually took it to the auction, got rid of it through that train. So got rid of that. Then I moved on to another car, which was the Jeep. I ended up buying a Jeep TJ, the 2-door version, and I love that thing. That thing was great. Everything about it. Jeeps are cool. I always think they're awesome. That was a manual 5-speed as well with the 3-liter V6, or no, that was a straight 6 engine. The 4-liter straight 6, sorry. Great engine altogether. That was their workhorse back in the day. I love that thing. But again, now we had gotten married, got a couple kids. That was no longer practical. Ironically, I sold it and I ended up buying a 5-liter Mustang, which again is equally impractical. But I bought one, a 5-liter V8 with a 5-speed manual transmission. Now, I drove the legs off that for a couple of years. The thing I didn't like about that was the fact that, the rear-wheel drive, I found myself come wintertime, I was always like white-knuckling it because they are terrible cars for wintertime. Bad traction. The light rear end with the torquey engine, it was just a nightmare to drive in the wintertime. Plus, with 2 doors and new kids, I had to make that car go away. So I drove that for a couple of years, and I really enjoyed it, but it just wasn't working out. So along the way, I drove a couple of different pickup trucks. I bought and sold. Those were just sort of intermediate. I still had the 911, of course, at this point. But then, finally, the 911 sold. And then I ended up finding, I went on a nationwide manhunt for a 930 turbo, or a Porsche 930, which is the turbo version, similar to the one that I found in California that time. And I found, after looking at a lot of kind of bad examples, I came across a really, really nice one. And it was in Calgary. It was about a 3-hour drive away from here. And it was owned by a local oil tycoon guy. And he was really into race cars. And I should have figured that out. I mean, he really races his cars, but I should have figured out what ended up happening with this car as a result of this guy owning it, because it turns out he was really into tracking his cars. He loved track cars, and my car spent time on the track. He had adjustable boost in there and a bunch of things. He ended up essentially blowing up the engine internally, not to the point where he wouldn't drive. It actually still had good compression, but rings, everything internally was coming apart. And I didn't realize that until a couple of years later when I took it to my mechanic to do a reseal, and we started pulling it apart and saw every piston ring in the car absolutely annihilated and obliterated. So I had to do a full top to bottom engine rebuild on that car. Cost a lot of money, close to 30 grand by the time it was all said and done, with the clutch and the engine and the whole 9 yards. Wow, what a mistake that was. I still love the car. I rebuilt everything, cleaned it right up, totally restored it, and I ended up selling it to a great guy here locally. He was just really had to have this car. And, as time went on, I tried different vehicles. We also ended up buying a BMW 318 Ti. That was our first experience with a BMW. We enjoyed it. Those are not necessarily the prettiest of BMWs. However, it was our first experience with one, and it was a great car. It actually treated us very well. We had no issues with it other than typical maintenance. And then we moved that along, and we ended up buying a BMW 320, which we enjoyed that as well. Of course, not a lot of power, but it was a great car, and it treated us equally as well. Other than maintenance, it was very robust. Then we started getting into other things, started getting into got the E60 M5. We had other cars too in between there, just sort of stuffed in there, like a Ford Probe we had at one point. We ended up with another Volkswagen Cabrio, a newer one, and Porsche's 944, Corvette. Tried a lot of different things, and at the end of the day, I always seem to come back to the German cars. But at one point, I decided, because I ended up meeting that now, the way it turns out, he's one of my friends. His name's Ed. He runs a local shop, repair shop that services, Porsches and Ferraris and all that locally here. And I ran into him through kind of a roundabout way. And I started hanging around, chatting with him, because he's another car guy that likes to talk car stuff. And we started talking about this, that, and the other. And he would have cool cars in there like Ferraris. He had 355s, 348s. Then all of a sudden he started getting, newer stuff, 360s. And then at one point he had a 430 in there. And I'm like, wow, this is some nice cars. Every time I saw a car like that, I just got really kind of excited to see a Ferrari in a shop. Then, the first time I saw a Lamborghini Gallardo in his shop, I fell in love. I knew I had to have one. Turns out he was on a test drive, checking out the condition of this particular car. And I jumped in the car with him. And I thoroughly enjoyed the experience, the vibration in the back and the tingling sensation in your back from that engine vibration, the stiff ride, the sound, the feel, the aggression. I knew I was instantaneously in love with that car. I needed one. And so that became the search, and I sold the Porsche and eventually ended up buying the Lamborghini Gallardo, which I have today. So along the way, I've got to tell you, I've driven a lot of cars, other cars that, friends of mine or things that I've test driven, I've driven Ferraris and Lamborghinis, been in Diablos and Aventadors and 458s and McLarens and a lot of really cool cars. I've gotten to experience and driven Vipers and Vets, and domestic and German and Italian and British. And I honestly believe I've tried a lot of these things, and I truly believe that I have a good sense of what I like. And I'm a true car enthusiast. I can appreciate any interesting car, but I always seem to gravitate to certain things. So along the way, I got to tell you, there's, a couple of vehicles that stand out in my mind that really, really left an impression. Both the Fiat, because it was my first sports car, and for another reason, which we'll get to in a second, and the Porsche 930s. So the Fiat X19 and the Porsche 930 both left lasting impressions because they both challenged my mortality on several occasions. And when I say that, you're probably wondering, what do you mean by that? Well, the sad part is there was several times where I almost wrapped that Fiat around a telephone pole because of drifting it on the street. Never ever race cars on the street. That's the first thing I've got to tell you. I was too stupid when I was young, and I did things like that, and I came really, really close to inches of my life. The Porsche 930, same thing. That car, though, I wasn't really drifting or acting ridiculous, but the car has a power band that gets away on you quickly. And I remember a couple incidents. One, for example, I was coming into a traffic circle very quickly, probably much faster than I should be. In second gear at about 3,500 RPM. I was coming around the traffic circle, and as I was exiting, I got onto the throttle. As I got onto the throttle, the car spun one way, the other way, the other way. All I'm looking at is oncoming traffic, light post, traffic, light post, traffic, and the car's skidding back and forth, and all of a sudden it kind of straightens out, and I saved it. Those two cars both nearly took my life on a few occasions, and they really stand out to me. And those cars, they're very, very cool in their own way, but they both almost bit my head off, literally. So those two things really stand out to me. What is the worst car I've ever had? I would say it was that Plymouth Horizon. Was probably the worst car. I bought it. It was rough. It was bad. It had a loud transmission whine, which led up to one day it finally exploding on the freeway. Looking back, I see a trail of oil on the ground, and the car's not moving any faster. It's just coasting to a stop. So bad, bad car. So anyway, guys, I just wanted to share with you, you guys probably wondering, like, what do I do in my spare time? How do I do to afford these cars? You know, where did I learn to like cars so much? And I revert back to that moment where I was with my dad in the stereo shop. That was really the first moment. That was a defining moment for me where I decided I like these cars. And then, of course, how to save up? Well, my way to save for these cars truly is incremental. I wasn't a guy with a silver spoon and a red carpet. I really had to earn it the hard way. My parents tried very hard just to keep food in our mouths and a roof over the head. They didn't have money for fancy cars. I didn't have a dad who sold his fancy business for $10 million and threw me, $5 million just to kind of do with what I can or want. I didn't have any kind of hand-me-downs. I literally had to work my way from the bottom. Now, I'm by no means filthy rich, but I've done okay. And a lot of it is just, when you're committed and you have a focus on something you really want and prioritize it, you can make anything happen. And that's exactly what I did. I worked my way up. I bought, an RX-7. Then I sold that and I had a little bit of money. Then I bought a 911 and I put that money down and I saved and borrowed a little bit more and I paid that off. Then I sold that car and put that on the 930, but I had to save up a little bit more, and eventually a couple of years I paid that off. And you'll notice I kept working my way up. That is the way to do it. Hit the grind, focus. If you want it, you can have it. Those are the cars I had. They're what makes me the guy I am today. And I just wanted to share with you guys the type of thing that I'm doing today and where I'm working and how that's really afforded me my lifestyle. So hope all you guys enjoyed the video. I just wanted to share this as a celebration to my 10,000 subscribers this week. Make sure you guys help out. Get your friends in here. I'd love to have a lot more visitors. To be honest, my next big stop is at 100,000. Eventually, I see the channel evolving into more of a lifestyle vlog where I'm really living, day by day, talking about my experiences with the cars, whether it's a BMW or whether it's my Lamborghini or whether it's some other, supercar. I want to live through that, share with you all my experiences and projects and drives. And I want to give you the full experience through my eyes, through the camera on YouTube. So make sure you guys come around. Tell your friends all about the channel. I'd love to see you guys. There is going to be a lot of great content coming up. We're just getting started, guys. We're at 10,000. Next big stop, 100,000 subscribers. Let's help me get there, guys. We're going to create a lot more great content. So thanks for coming around again. Hope to see you real soon. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.